In a small apartment, past midnight, Bob Dylan challenged Jimi Hendrix. "Take off all those pedals. Show me who you are." Jimmy's response left Dylan unable to speak. The room was small. A fourth-floor walk-up in Greenwich Village. Spring 1968. The kind of apartment where musicians gathered after shows, after the crowds went home, after the business of being famous could be set aside for a few hours. There were maybe 7 people there. A bassist whose name no one remembers. 2 women who'd come with someone. A journalist who would never write about what he witnessed because he understood, even then, that some moments weren't meant to be consumed by strangers. And 2 men sitting across from each other on mismatched chairs. Bob Dylan. Jimi Hendrix. They'd met before. Casual encounters at festivals, brief conversations backstage. Mutual respect spoken through nods rather than words. But tonight was different. Tonight someone, no one remembers who, had suggested they play together. Just play. Nothing formal. Nothing recorded. Jimmy had brought his Stratocaster. No amplifier. No pedals. Just the guitar, because someone said there wouldn't be room for equipment in the apartment. Dylan had his acoustic. The one with the scratches and the worn fretboard and the sound that had defined a generation. They'd been playing for maybe an hour. Trading songs. Dylan doing his Dylan thing, that voice like gravel and prophecy, the guitar serving the words. Jimmy playing quietly, respectfully, his electric guitar barely audible without an amp, just the physical sound of strings and wood. And then Dylan stopped. He looked at Jimmy. Really looked at him. Not at the icon. Not at the image of the wild man who'd set his guitar on fire at Monterey. Not at the showman everyone talked about. He looked at the musician. "Can I ask you something?" Dylan said. Jimmy nodded. He was sitting on a low stool, the Stratocaster resting across his lap, his long fingers draped casually over the strings. "All those effects," Dylan continued. "The fuzz. The wah. The feedback. Is that who you are? Or is it what you hide behind?" The room went completely still. It wasn't said with cruelty. Dylan's voice carried genuine curiosity. But the question hung in the air like smoke, and everyone understood what was really being asked. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Jimmy looked down at his guitar. His thumb brushed across the strings, barely a sound, just the whisper of nail against steel. When he looked back up at Dylan, his expression hadn't changed. Calm. Almost gentle. "You want to hear me without effects?" Jimmy asked quietly. "Yeah," Dylan said. "Just you. Just the guitar. No tricks." Jimmy shifted slightly on his stool. He adjusted his grip on the neck of the Stratocaster. His right hand moved to hover over the strings near the bridge. "Okay," he said simply. He played a single note. E open. Let it ring. In that small apartment, with no amplifier, no electricity, no effects, just wood and steel and physics, that note filled the room. Pure. Clean. Perfect intonation. The kind of tone that doesn't come from equipment. It comes from decades of knowing exactly where your fingers need to be, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly how the instrument wants to breathe. Then his left hand moved. A bend. Subtle. The note climbed a half step, then a full step, sustained perfectly, vibrato controlled with such precision it sounded like the guitar was singing. His right hand struck another note. Then another. No picks. Just fingers. A phrase emerged, 5 notes, maybe 6. Nothing complex. Nothing showy. Just a melodic statement that felt ancient and inevitable, like it had always existed and Jimmy was simply revealing it. The room held its breath. Dylan's fingers, which had been resting on his own guitar strings, went still. Jimmy continued. His playing was quiet, physically quiet, because acoustic volume can only go so far, but it carried absolute authority. Every note mattered. Every silence between notes mattered more. He wasn't playing fast. He wasn't playing loud. He was playing with such complete command of his instrument that speed and volume became irrelevant. His left hand moved up the fretboard. A jazz chord. Then another. Voicings that shouldn't have worked but did, dissonant intervals that resolved in unexpected ways. His thumb wrapped around the neck, muting the low E string while his other fingers created harmony that sounded like three guitarists playing in perfect conversation. The melody returned. That same five-note phrase, but now embellished. Bent notes that spoke with human inflection. Slides that connected ideas. Ghost notes, barely struck strings that added texture without announcing themselves. Dylan's acoustic guitar, still in his hands, had become an audience member. Forgotten. Irrelevant. Because what Jimi was doing wasn't a conversation. It was a complete statement that needed no response. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Jimi's playing grew more complex, but not in the way most people understand complexity. He wasn't adding more notes. He was adding more meaning. His right hand, no pick, remember, was creating dynamics that effects pedals try to replicate but never quite achieve. Soft attacks that blossomed into singing sustain. Percussive strikes on muted strings that provided rhythm. Harmonics that appeared like overtones from another dimension. The bassist in the corner, whose name history forgot, was staring with his mouth open. He played professionally. He knew good when he heard it. This wasn't good. This was something else entirely. One of the women had tears on her face. She didn't know why. The music wasn't sad. It wasn't happy. It just was, and somehow that was enough to crack something open inside her. The journalist, who would die in 1973 without ever writing about this night, would tell his wife years later, "I heard God that night. Not metaphorically. I heard what music sounds like when there's nothing between the player and the truth." Dylan hadn't moved. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were locked on Hendrix's left hand, watching fingers that made the impossible look inevitable. Jimi's playing began to circle back. The original five-note phrase returned, now transformed by everything that had come between. He played it once. Twice. Let the last note ring out. A perfectly controlled decay, the note fading so gradually it was impossible to say exactly when sound became silence. His right hand lifted from the strings. The room stayed quiet for 3 full seconds. Then Dylan put his guitar down. Carefully. Deliberately. Placed it on the floor beside his chair. "Jesus," he whispered. It wasn't a curse. It was a prayer. Jimi looked at him with those calm eyes. "Effects don't hide anything," he said quietly. "They just give me more ways to say what's already there." Dylan nodded slowly. I didn't understand. Most people don't," Jimi said, without any trace of arrogance. "Just stating a fact. They hear the show. They don't hear what makes the show possible." In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. He stood up. Walked across the small room to where an amp sat in the corner, someone's practice amp, small, nothing fancy. He plugged in his Stratocaster. Turned the amp on. Volume low. No pedals. No effects. Just guitar into amplifier. He sat back down. "Now I'll show you the difference," he said. He played the same phrase. Those same 5 notes. But now, with electricity humming through the circuit, with magnetic pickups translating string vibration into signal, with speaker cone pushing air, the phrase transformed. Not louder. Richer. The sustain became infinite. The harmonics multiplied. The attack had presence that acoustic couldn't provide. The notes didn't just exist in the room, they inhabited it, filled corners, wrapped around people. Jimi's left hand executed a bend that screamed without screaming. His right hand created a tremolo effect using only his picking technique, rapid-fire strikes that made the note shiver. And then, only then, did he do something technical. His right hand moved to the volume knob on his guitar. He turned it down mid-phrase, creating a swell effect. Then back up. Then down again. The note bloomed and faded, like a heartbeat. "This is the instrument," Jimmy said, his playing continuing beneath his words. "The amp is just making it loud enough to hear properly." His left hand executed a series of hammer-ons, notes created without picking, just fingers striking the fretboard with such precision they sang. Blues phrases emerged. Jazz harmonies. Classical fingerings. All flowing together as if they'd always been the same language and everyone else just hadn't noticed. "And the effects," he continued, his playing never stopping. "They're just vocabulary. More ways to speak. But if you don't have anything to say..." He let the phrase hang unfinished, his guitar punctuating with a descending run that ended on a low, resonant chord. Dylan was sitting forward now, elbows on his knees, completely absorbed. Jimmy played for maybe 3 more minutes. Nothing flashy. Nothing wild. Just pure musicianship, the kind that makes other musicians realize how far they still have to go. He demonstrated voicings. He showed how a single note could carry an entire emotional landscape just by how you approached it. He played a blues that somehow also contained Bach. When he finished, he turned the amp off, unplugged his guitar, sat back down on his stool. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Like the air pressure in the room had changed. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. Dylan picked up his acoustic again. Not to play. Just to hold it. His fingers traced the wood grain absently. "I've been playing guitar since I was a kid," Dylan said finally, his voice rough. 20 years, maybe more. And I just realized I don't actually know the instrument. Not like that. I know how to use it. That's not the same thing. Most people use it," Jimmy agreed. "Nothing wrong with that. The guitar serves the song. That's noble. But you..." "I'm having a conversation," Jimmy finished. "The guitar and me. Been talking for years now. We understand each other." The bassist, still forgotten by history, spoke up. "How did you learn that? Who taught you to play like that?" Jimmy shrugged slightly. "Nobody taught me. I just listened. To what the guitar wanted to say. To what each string needs. Every instrument is different. This Stratocaster, she's got opinions. You have to respect them." One of the women finally spoke. "You talk about it like it's alive." "It is," Jimmy said simply. "Wood and metal and wire, sure. But once you make music with something long enough, it becomes more than parts. It becomes a voice. And voices deserve respect." Dylan was still staring at his own guitar. "I thought I was respecting mine. Writing songs for it. Making it famous." "You are," Jimmy said, no judgment in his tone. "There are different kinds of respect. Yours serves poetry. That's why people listen to every word you write. Mine serves sound. Different paths. Both valid. But you could write songs," the journalist said. "You do write songs." "I tell stories with notes instead of words sometimes," Jimmy acknowledged. "But Dylan tells stories with words that change how people think. I just make them feel. Neither is better." Dylan shook his head slowly. "Don't do that. Don't diminish what you just did. What I just witnessed. That was mastery. Pure. No qualifications needed." Jimmy looked at him with those calm, knowing eyes. "You challenged me. That was fair. You wanted to know if the effects were hiding something. I showed you they weren't. But the real answer is simpler. The guitar knows when you're lying. You can't hide behind anything, not effects, not technique, not reputation. The instrument always tells the truth." Dylan was quiet for a long time. Then he did something no one in that room expected. He extended his hand across the space between them. Jimmy took it. They shook once. Firm. Brief. An acknowledgement that didn't need words. "Thank you," Dylan said. "Just that. Nothing more. They didn't play again that night. They didn't need to. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Dylan never publicly challenged Jimi's use of effects again. In fact, in a 1969 interview, rarely quoted, he said, "Hendrix understands something most of us are still learning. The sound isn't the trick. The truth is the trick." The bassist whose name history forgot quit music 6 months later. He'd realized he'd been playing for the wrong reasons. One of the women became a music teacher. She told her students about the night she learned that mastery wasn't about volume. The journalist kept his notes in a drawer until he died. His wife found them years later. "Tonight I learned silence is louder than noise, and the best players make you forget the instrument exists." Jimi Hendrix died 2 years after that night in the apartment. But the people who were there carried the memory like a secret. Because they'd witnessed something rare, the moment when ego met truth, and ego chose to step aside. Dylan still plays. But he plays differently now. And somewhere, in a small apartment that no longer exists, a single note still rings.